beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike.
Welcome to the world of Street Fighter 3. Prepare for battle. Well, I got the picture. Yeah, I got the picture.
Street Fighter III New Generation had a lot of things going for it. Obviously, it was gorgeous. 2D fighting games seldom move so lavishly as to rival feature film animation. It also had a forward-thinking comeback mechanic taken directly from real-life martial arts, as the parry system's creators will assert. Finally, it had the weight and heft of its legacy. As the true direct sequel to the genre-defining and preposterously lucrative Street Fighter II, it had more than simply name recognition going for it. The problem, though, is that New Generation kinda sucks. Protracted in its development due to both that lavish animation and directionless design, as well as sporting a cast of characters that returning competitors didn't recognize their easily identifiable and oft-cited flaws. We know this from sources like a CFN interview with producer Tomoshi Sadamoto, anecdotes contained in Steve Hendershot's Undisputed Street Fighter coffee table book, and an oral history of New Generation on enthusiast website Polygon. But these are merely pieces of the overall puzzle. More precisely, New Generation is a game where puzzle pieces are noticeably missing. The cast is small and containing 3 characters that are head and palette swaps. 2 of the characters are almost totally identical. Some characters lack moves that were either standard to their gameplay years before, like in the case of Ryu and Ken's missing jumping Tatsu, or that made them inviable in versus play at all, like, well, all of Oro. New Generation is a beautiful, expensive, unfinished sketch of a game, and that scant 6-month turnaround to its update, Second Impact, implies that the development team knew that they had a long way to go. Emblematic of that is the giant German wrestler Hugo Andor. A monstrous, towering figure, his addition to the cast, and Urian's too given his height, is why Street Fighter III's first revision is fully titled Second Impact Giant Attack. In fact, it was this size that partially made New Generation release in such a state. From the CFN interview with Sadamoto, we know that creating the animation took the most time during development. Also, according to Sadamoto, Hugo is one of the characters initially planned for New Generation 2, but due to his size, he was not completed by the time the arcade boards needed to be shipped, and was dropped mid-development. In fact, unfinished versions of him appear in the code of New Generation, as well as a partially finished stage that eventually appeared in Second Impact, according to website The Cutting Room Floor. At a certain point of view, Hugo's late arrival was a real blow to New Generation from a thematic standpoint. Time and again, I've pointed out in this video series that the Street Fighter franchise has a singular fixation with rivalry, both friendly and otherwise. Ryu and Ken, Yun and Yang, Urian and Gil. But part of New Generation's mission was to literally be a new generation of fighters with a new leading man. As the proposed new main character of the series, who then was meant to be Alex's nemesis? In litigating Second Impact and its inclusion of a completed character, we now have one. Second Impact has gone down in franchise history as an enigma, a curio. Understandably, its predecessor was bestowed as strong a marketing push as Capcom could give it at the time of its 1997 release. Japanese arcade enthusiast magazine Gamist gave it both a strategy guide MOOC treatment, which were the high standards of such strategy guide publications at the time, as well as a fan MOOC full of interviews and art contests. Third Strike, being such a dramatic overhaul of the Street Fighter III games compared to New Generation, had 2 separate Gamist strategy MOOCs. Second Impact, likely based on its near immediate release after New Generation, never enjoyed the same treatment. In the West, hobbyist publications like Electronic Gaming Monthly ran lengthy features during the run-up to New Generation, but due to a variety of factors like the rise in popularity of polygonal fighting games and the decline of the genre in general, coverage of Second Impact was minimal at best. Though the revision did have a tournament life in Japan for over a year, its total eclipse by Third Strike doomed it to obscurity practically the moment it was released. What little we can glean of Second Impact's fallow marketing is that the coming of Hugo was meant to be, well, impactful, and specifically with an Alex rivalry in mind. This was even foreshadowed in a piece of art from the New Generation Gamist MOOC, later reprinted in Capcom's secret file promotional pamphlet for the revision, which we'll come back to later. For now, it's worth reiterating Hugo's immense size. It was front and center on the cover of the secret file publication, and in the playful double-page spread starring the rest of the game's cast. Both of these evoke kaiju and tokusatsu imagery. not unlike the inspirations behind the direct reference to Second Impact's name, Neon Genesis Evangelion, Sadamoto himself being a family cousin of one of Ava's creators. The promotional flyer for the game also depicts the Hugo Alex acrimony, as does the attract mode for Second Impact itself. All of this makes sense from the standpoint of both characters' visual inspirations. First, as mentioned in his own episode and confirmed in both the CFN interview and by previous Capcom producer Seth Killian, we know that Alex draws heavily from professional wrestling entertainer Terry Hulk Hogan Bollea. In Bollea's meteoric rise to wrestling stardom in the 1980s, he too shared a rivalry with a giant of a man, gentle but powerful, that was written for a heel turn for one of his most iconic matches. Though never officially cited, the similarities between Hugo Andor and Andrei Rene Rousimov, known to the world as Andre the Giant, are both blatant and undeniable. From his curly fop of hair to his imposing physique to his own last name, Hugo is Andre, and Andre is Hugo. Perhaps no further proof is necessary than his and Alex's special match intro, which calls back to Andre and Hugo's legendary title bout from WrestleMania 3 in 1987. Of course, fans of the series know that Second Impact, or even the unfinished scraps from New Generation, is not where Hugo the video game character was born. An ex-member of Metro City's Mad Gear Gang franchise compendium Eternal Challenge states that he left Germany for the US at the age of 20 to make it big as a pro wrestler, but fell into gang life in the big city. This is a setup that's essentially retconned for the German Giant, though, as the world knew him first as simply Andor, an enemy from Capcom's seminal 1989 belt-scrolling beat-em-up Final Fight. In fact, there was an entire Andor family in the game, and Hugo's color palette choices in Third Strike represent each of them as they appeared in the arcade classic. At this point, it's common knowledge that Final Fight began development as a follow-up to the original Street Fighter game, and even had promotional flyers printed to prove it. In the years since its release and Street Fighter II's runaway success, Capcom has gone out of its way to solidify that there exists a shared universe between the two, and by extension, the Saturday Night Slam Masters series. Hugo and the Andor clan's resemblance to Andre the Giant was obvious from the start, but no more so than the name. Andor, after all, is the phonetic spelling of Andre in Japanese, a fact that the US branch of Capcom likely kept in place when translating the game to keep the actual Andore off its collective back. His visual design has essentially stayed faithful to this original showing, though the development team for Second Impact toyed with making him kind of an anti-Alex at one point. But like his real-life inspiration, Hugo is something of a gentle giant, as evidenced in his post-match dialogue with much of the cast of Second Impact and Third Strike, as well as his endings for both games. Curiously, this may be the only ending set that seems to overwrite the Second Impact finale, as Hugo in the previous game convinces one of 4 characters he fights at the end of the game to be his tag team partner, while his Third Strike ending indicates the forming of a Street Fighter-based wrestling faction, not unlike the late 1990s NWO from the now-defunct WCW. The Second Impact ending provides some nice Easter eggs to the Saturday Night Slam Masters games, giving shoutouts to playable characters Biss Slamkovich and Gunlock, and the league that they fight in, the CWA. This makes sense given Street Fighter III series producer Tomoshi Sadamoto's involvement with the arcade wrestling series. It seems that the fall of the Mad Gear Gang during the events of the Final Fight series inspired Hugo to get back into the ring, and taking Poison, one of his former colleagues, along for the ride. Like real-life pro wrestling ringside valets like Sable to Mark Marrow, Stephanie McMahon to Triple H, and perhaps the prototype Elizabeth to Macho Man Randy Savage, Poison acts as Hugo's manager and trusty sidekick. But she is a fascinating character in her own right, and worth some dissection. Another example of a persona more famous for what she represents rather than where she comes from, Poison is one of the token female enemies in the original Final Fight arcade game, and as the beat-em-up shared many design staff with Street Fighter II, she was designed by Akira Akiman Yasuda himself. Due to some draconian censorship by Nintendo of America, she and her palette swap counterpart Roxy were removed from the home versions of the game and replaced with more live male antagonists. According to the famously out-of-print survey of Nintendo history, Game Over by David Sheff, playtesters for the SNES version objected to protagonists attacking women, to which Yasuda replied that they were post-op transsexual women as if it were some sort of compromise. Former Street Fighter series producer Yoshinori Ono reiterated this in several interviews during the Street Fighter IV and Street Fighter Cross Tekken era, even poking fun at the concept in one of the latter game's promotional videos. Though Capcom is yet to take an official stance on this though, Ono's comments notwithstanding, fans have essentially accepted her as a proud trans woman. In the Street Fighter Cross Tekken Artworks book, however, Yasuda personally believes that she's a trans female to US audiences while being biologically female to the Japanese. Like many other Street Fighter characters, and fittingly those involved with professional wrestling, Poison's design didn't come out of thin air. Fans like Twitter user Mortis have found visual references dating back as far as 1988 as the character Hollywood from the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling promotion bared a striking resemblance. Yasuda himself chimed in on the find and neither confirmed nor denied the inspiration, stating that his memory is rather cloudy at this point. As she shares the name of an infamous glam metal band of the same period, other fans point to this picture as another antecedent. Regardless, she's attached to Hugo at the hip, even in her appearance in the Street Fighter III adaptation manga, Ryu Final by Masahiko Nakahira, released between New Generation and Third Strike. This extends to some of Hugo's match intros, including an Easter egg intro where birds perch on his body that only happens against the opponents listed on the right. She also appears in his taunts if the start button is held down along with the normal taunt triggers. As mentioned a few times already, unfinished sprites for Hugo have been found within the code for New Generation, but also an unfinished background, which eventually surfaced in Second Impact. Calling back to his Germanic roots, the fight takes place during a traditional Oktoberfest celebration complete with glockenspiel deep in the background. This is a Bavarian folk festival that runs for nearly 3 weeks in early fall months and famous for its ancestral food from the region and copious consumption of Oktoberfest beer styles like Marzens. Curiously, this one seems to be held in a gigantic dome of some kind if you look away from the bratwurst and revelers and up to the sky. His location change in the year gap between Second Impact and Third Strike keeps him in his motherland, but within the confines of his own home, and is full of neat little nuggets. It certainly gives you a window into Hugo's lifestyle, with large piles of food on the floor and the various toys and balloons strewn about the room to clue you in to the childlike demeanor he's often portrayed with in outside media. Evidently, Hugo's also into rare and exotic birds as well. And what could be a bit of visual storytelling, the Christmas tree in the background might give us an idea of what time of year this game takes place, or it could just be another object of wonderment for an overgrown kid. He also has pictures of himself littered throughout the area too. On the far right, we have his portrait from the Second Impact character select screen. His own name is spray painted on the left wall, along with a crude caricature that you would be forgiven for initially thinking is Mick Jagger. On the far left is the cover of Second Impact's Secret Files promotional pamphlet, recreated in pixels for this background. Itself, a riff on the one-sheet poster for the 1976 remake of King Kong starring Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange. Among it all are title belts and trophies from Hugo's previous victories, some clearly modeled after Japanese wrestling trophies. For this game, Len Carlson gives Hugo his best German accent, an actor that the strongman shares with whatever is mumbled under Q's mask. He replaces Wataru Tagaki in Second Impact, who also voiced Yang. As very few actors in the Street Fighter III games voiced a single character, these men were mentioned in previous episodes of this video series. Poison is no exception, as she was portrayed by Atsuko Tanaka, who also voices Chun-Li. As a character in the game, Hugo also bends some established Street Fighter rules as far as his normal moveset is concerned. Another character that lacks proximity normals, much of what he has doubles as overhead moves that must be blocked high, like his standing hard punch, standing medium kick, standing hard kick, which also can be given some extra distance by holding the stick toward it or away from the opponent, and his terribly unsafe crouching hard punch and hard kick. He's also another character that lacks any target combos, but since he's mostly played for his high defense and grappling moves, this isn't much of a loss. He's unique in the game in that his low-medium kick is his normal knockdown sweep, not the hard kick, though that will also put somebody on their back. Like his Russian counterpart from Street Fighter II, he can perform a body splash by jumping and pressing down in hard punch, which is great for crossing up rivals, and has a haymaker with towards and hard punch that covers a massive distance of the playfield. Bearing all this in mind, Hugo's size is both his best asset and his biggest liability. On the plus side, he has tremendous reach with his limbs that can outpoke most of the cast with ease. On the other, the fact that he's the largest character in the game also makes him the biggest target, with his gigantic and sometimes awkward hurt boxes. Slow movement doesn't help him either, even though his moveset has tremendous damage output. In that respect, he's not so far removed from Q in that he shares some of the same flaws. And like Q, he can boost his defense with his taunt, and also stackably boost his attack depending on if the buttons are tapped or if the player has time to hold them down. Hugo is also the first character that we meet that is the victim of what we now refer to as on the ground, or simply OTG combos. This is a bug where a knockdown character can sometimes be hit with specific moves, and in this case 12 can combo his neutral hold and then hit Hugo with either Super Art 1 or Super Art 2, not that this is a matchup people would often see at high level. All of this means that Hugo is generally considered to be in the lower tier of the game's tournament hierarchy. It's not his fault that he's the biggest and the strongest, but it doesn't necessarily help. Hugo has some curiosities with his moveset that the master players employ for making him just as much of a striking combo character as he is a defensive grappler. In broad terms, he does resemble the Street Fighter series Zangief with two moves. First is the most obvious similarity with the 360 motion moonsault press, which isn't so far removed from the famous spinning pile driver. The strength of the button press determines the damage, but lighter versions of the move have greater throw range. It has no EX variation, but is a staple of Hugo play. The second is the Meat Squasher, a running throw move that's similar to the flying power bomb that the Russian gained in 1993's Super Street Fighter II. The difference is that Hugo will turn the opponent around to the opposite corner, which adds great pressure to his game, but the move can be easily avoided and is hard to connect. It's performed with a 360 motion and a kick and also has no EX variation. His further specials are much more unique. On the grappling side is the shoot down backbreaker, an anti-air grab that will pluck opponents out of the air. Performed with a dragon punch motion and a kick, Hugo can be hit out of this move on the way up, so it's not entirely safe, but can get him out of trouble in certain situations as the strength of the button determines distance to travel. Again, it lacks any EX use. Coupled with this is the Ultra Throw, a move seemingly made to be used in conjunction with the shoot down backbreaker. Basically, Hugo tosses the opponent against the wall, and it's one of the few attacks in the game that offers a wall bounce that can be followed up with other moves as the opponent is in the juggle state. At mid-screen, this typically means the jumping throw special. In the corner, however, this move can set up some nasty juggle mix-ups when combined with other specials. Hugo's further moveset can effectively transform him into an unlikely stun monster similar to the Makoto or Necro, though perhaps in fewer overall effective ways. The monster lariat isn't really much on its own, frankly. Performed with a fireball motion and kick, it will cover some distance and does decent damage and stun, but it's more of a poke. Burning meter with the EX version though, and it gives Hugo a bit of a ground press as it can be comboed into with a low or standing light kick. It always causes a knockdown. Holding the buttons down will cause Hugo to basically chase the opponent down. In doing so though, he'll pass through them much farther after the knockdown as players like Automatic have found. Slowing the input down so the hit does not register in the first frame of its animations though, as if buffered or comboed with a normal move, and Hugo will not go so far from the rival, which is better for his Ogizeme. The Giant Palm Bomber is one of the character's best moves. Performed with a reverse fireball motion and a punch, this is somewhat similar to Alex's Flash Chop, and that it can be a little difficult to combo into, but provides plenty of hurt and stun with the speed to throw it out with near impunity. The best part is that it can be linked to further claps several times, mostly starting with a slow but heavy hard punch version on a ducking opponent. Or Hugo can connect other specials with it. It's a very versatile move. The EX version hits 3 times and causes knockdown. Used in conjunction with other stun-heavy attacks, and Hugo can grind up an opponent in the corner, especially since, like Necro, he has a throw that can be comboed out of in that close space for even more cruel mix-up and stun potential. Though good Hugo players don't see a dichotomy between throws versus striking, the use of his super arts in his case do present him as such. Hugo, for his part, is another character that has 2 strong super arts that many players find to be matchup dependent. The first, the Gigas Breaker, is again like Zangief's supers, in that it is a super-powered moonsault press throw, and one of the most damaging raw moves in the game. Performed with a 720-degree rotation on the stick, specialist Hugo players found that the game's super jump activation slows his jumping animations down, giving a standing 720 some reliability with some practice without having to jump first. The Megaton Press, his second super art, is a variation of the shoot-down backbreaker, with all the same qualities save for the enormous added damage. Also generally used in combination with the Ultra Throw, its use tends to be rather limited overall and is his least used of the 3 supers. The Hammer Mountain Super Art 3 is more his combo move. Essentially 5 attacks strung together that must be blocked high, it offers the most EX meter and 2 small stocks and can be comboed into from several moves. His most versatile of the 3, but the least damaging, this attack is also mistranslated in the US version of the game where it's called the Hammer Frenzy. Voice actors for both Second Impact and Third Strike keep to the Japanese nomenclature though. This move can also be chambered to chase down the opponent by holding down the punch button. Hugo can be a menacing presence then, even if strong characters tend to win tournaments with more consistency. Still, when it's skill against skill alone, the great Japanese players honed in on his quirks years ago and have made Hugo something of a king amongst the low-tier characters of the cast. But like others on the roster, Hugo is just as fascinating for what he's made of as he is how he's played. While seldom a major tournament winner, Master Hugo players continue to be competitive threats, even if the character is lacking in comparison to other roster choices. Don't worry though, it won't go to his head.